I'm trying to keep focused here, and I derailed. I'm going to make another video and try to focus on what I'm saying. That's not a bad thing. People look at it's very important to be focused on what you value, but you also need to realize that God will lead you to all valuable things through things you already find valuable. Value begets value. Light cleaves to light. Good comes from good. Better comes out of best. So you do your best. That is the best way to find what's better than your best, and so forth. All good comes out of all good. It's sequential. It's incremental. Everything in God's kingdom is a hierarchy. It's unavoidable. So when you're focused on something that has value, which is really important, and that's what you should seek to do, find and focus on the things of greatest value. In that path, have your eyes open and your head on a swivel and pay attention, because that is where you're going to find the next lateral shoot that turns out to be the direct path to what you actually want. Tremendous value in what I just said. So, this video is not about that. But this video, we're going to talk about a lot of things very briefly. I'm way overdue to write. I'm in the midst of revising like 400 pages about the Holy Ghost and Revelation, and I need to integrate that into some other ideas about wisdom and reasoning and things. But the books are progressing along well, and we're billowing towards a consolidation of ideas, which is good. And what I'm trying to do now is lay things out in the best order and to group things in the best grouping, and try not to repeat myself to keep the page count to a minimum, which translates into keeping my time best spent, so I don't have to rewrite the same ideas 10 times without gaining any understanding on your part. So I'm going to start with a quote from an apocryphal gospel. So the funny thing about the Apocrypha is that whether or not it's authentic doesn't matter as much as the value of the ideas in the words. So that's an idea for life. People bristle at music or movies or whatever media or experiences that might not be the textbook ideal of a holy life. And I'm not in any way suggesting people should fill their lives with anything but the brightest things they can find. However, one of the miracles of God's creation is that he has put pieces of himself in and through all things. And we can, as we strive to fill our lives with the best things, we can be assured that no matter what we're experiencing, we can use it to learn more about and become more like God. It's an amazing thing. We're all like baleen whales floating through the sea of life, and we take in all this, just whatever there is, and we spit out everything that's not plankton, and we just move on as we go. I'm not sure if I've used that analogy publicly or not, but there's more to it. In doing all of that, the whale creates and accumulates what's called mineral oil for some reason. And it's a very valuable thing. It was the most valuable reason that people hunted whales back in the day. I'm not sure about the economics of doing that today. But they would kill this whale and take that oil that it had accumulated. It had turned the chaos of the sea into this very valuable concentrated resource, and they used it for lamps and things. And that's that's how we are as God's children and servants as well, as we're out here trying to find and consolidate the things of value and convert them into a concentrated source that we can just hand off to someone else. And usually it requires your life. So with the Apocrypha, you extract what has value, and you don't care so much if this is an accurate quote from Jesus or not. You care if he could have said it, if it has value. And of course, that takes discernment and wisdom to detect. But anyway, here's the quote. When women place greater value on the treasures they hold, I'm sorry, I didn't start this quote with the context. The question was, when will the end come? When will your kingdom come? Someone asked him that. He said, when women, allegedly, right, according to the story, he said, when women place greater value on the treasures they hold, for men will strive harder for gold than for brass. When man and woman cease to pander to the flesh and become truly one in spirit. For of this I assure you, unless man and woman exalt the spirit above the flesh, they will not know life in glory. We could talk about this short quote for a very long time, but I want to focus this on the question of value and what people do for it, and in what people find it, and how much of it they find. These are all previews of broader and deeper topics that I'll explore in books that are coming out, but I want to give you some stuff to chew on until then. I remember a related story that comes to mind. It's funny, the more the Spirit you get in your life, you get random flashbacks from your past. And this is because memory is one of the many things God uses to teach us, as he promised his disciples in the New Testament, that the Holy Ghost would bring to remembrance things that he had taught them in the past. And the landscape of time is very different in heaven than it is here. All things are before the Lord, as if time did not exist. That's also a very deep topic that I'll tell you more about later. But as a result of this, the closer to him you draw, the more fluid the boundaries of time become. Not in some crazy way, like, you slip into the future, that's not what I mean, but the experiences of the past can be brought to your remembrance in such a way that it's so vivid that it's at least as vivid as it was when you first lived it. And it's amazing because on top of that is layered all of your subsequent experiences and understanding and shifts in value. It's amazing. And so the more open to it you are, like dreams and other kinds of revelations, the more open to it you are, the more God will use it in your life. And open to it, it's about a willingness to look at it, to value it, and to obey it, to extract the meaning out and live according to it. I've been shocked to learn, I can't say this definitively, of course, but the more people I get to know well, the more support I find for the belief that everyone gets inspired dreams at least once in their life. I feel like that's a thing that God does with everyone at least once. And I have been shocked to see how freely people throw those experiences in the trash by not even writing them down. I've known people well enough to see them get one or more of these dreams, and then they forget that they ever had them. And I bring it up and I'm like, you had a dream about this. This is exactly what was in the dream, and now it's happening. And they're like, what dream? And then I know a lot of people who have had the dreams and remember them, but just absolutely will not consider that they came to pass, or consider the other things in the dream that have not come to pass. That adds support that there's something here. If I told you, this is hypothetical, but let's say Let's think of something you could never imagine happening ever in a million years. Like I say, tomorrow, a 3-foot tall giraffe is going to knock on your front door and is going to have a bouquet of pink flowers. You'd say, what have you been smoking? And maybe you want some of that too. But if I said that in one sentence, and I said, and a comet is going to fall out of the sky 5 hours later and destroy your house and kill anyone inside of it. It's totally reasonable to say, look, did I say giraffe or elephant? The whole midget giraffe thing and the flowers, that's ridiculous. That would never happen in a million years. Okay, cool. Like, that is an absolutely reasonable position to take. But if that's exactly what happens, you better freaking get out of your house, right? At least for 5 hours. Give it 10, margin of error, right? Maybe go stay in a Holiday Inn Express that night and then come back, right? That becomes, so all of a sudden it was absolutely unreasonable to believe in the giraffe thing. And now all of a sudden it's the most reasonable thing in the world to completely believe that your house is going to be destroyed in a couple of hours by a comet, right? But no one does this because people are really dishonest. That's what it comes down to. I have no idea how I got onto this point. And this is one of the dangers of not making videos in a while. You get a lot of stockpiled things that you feel like you need to talk about. Maybe it'll come back to me. So getting back to this quote with value and what people value and where it comes from. We talked, it was dreams. What was before the dreams? Don't remember. Okay, so yeah, I really wish I could get back to what I think I was saying. How do you evaluate the worth of apocryphal texts? Anyway. Okay, greater value on the treasures they hold. Okay, so a really long video could be made about the treasures they hold. What's interesting about that is Jesus, hypothetical Jesus doesn't say when women obtain greater treasures and then place greater value on them. He says when they place greater value on the treasures they hold. That's really interesting because it implies that they have treasures that they don't know about. And that's absolutely the case. If men understood, we can zoom this out to the human level. If human beings understood value better than they do, no one would do what they do. And no one would do what they do for the same reasons that they do it. The biggest difference between this world today and the kingdom of God when it's fully established will not be knowledge in the sense that you think of when you think of the word. It will be value, and not in the sense that you think of when you think of the word. So let me try to rephrase it in words with meanings as we use them today. Those that get there will have very different knowledge than the average person today. But the definitive differences in that knowledge will primarily be factors of what you value and why. Maybe that's good enough. So, hypothetical Jesus here is saying that the primary difference that triggers the advent of the kingdom of God on earth is women placing greater value on the treasures they hold. And then men change their behavior to not accommodate for that, but they adjust their behavior accordingly. And then he says, when men and women cease to pander to the flesh and become truly one in spirit. Oh, there's a lot to say here. I'm not going to do it right now. Okay, let's switch gears. We're just using this to sort of percolate thought, not fully extrapolate it. Here's a principle. Let's approach this in a different way. Suppose there was a group of women who valued the treasures they held. How would their behavior change? Older women, so let's just put like a line at those who have chosen to marry someone, or those who are above a certain age, and we don't have to set what that age is. It's going to be on a gradient depending on tons of factors, and let's not get into that. But older women, if they valued the treasures they held, had greater value, placed greater value on the treasures they held, they would spend a substantial amount of their resources teaching those who had not gone through the decisions or time that made it impossible to go, I can phrase this better. They would dedicate a substantial quantity of their resources on the younger women, teaching them the value that they hold, teaching them the things that they value and by how much and why. They would be very, very oriented towards that. They would start with their own daughters and sons, because they'd teach their daughters to make choices that would maximize the wise use of that value. They would teach their sons to look for and marry young women who had done that. Why? Because, zooming out from this specific situation, the joy you have in life depends on a whole lot of things, but one of the things it depends on is the amount to which you can flow the price you've paid to others in a way that maximizes the value they find in it. So Abraham prayed to God for Isaac because even though he was married several times and he had Ishmael as a son, and he had more than 300 men in his household, so these were people who were loyal to him and who he had a way of serving and could transmit value to. There were over 300 men and all of their wives and children besides, who found that Abraham had more value to them than anything else they could be doing. And yet, he begged God to give him a son because what God had given him and taught him and gave him the ability to obtain exceeded the ability of all of those people to receive and value to the same degree that Abraham valued it. So let me give you some hand graphs. So I basically have a PhD in hand graphs. Okay, so if this is the value, now obviously the screen's limited. Am I still recording? I am. If this is the value that God has to give to men maximally, right? And most men and women, I'm saying humankind, they set a limit on that window that's tiny, tiny, tiny. Okay? But this is what he has to give. And let's say that this is what Abraham received from God. Abraham's window was much bigger than the people around him. Why Abraham begged for Isaac is because he didn't have anyone that could do this in his life, or this, or this, or this. Everyone else was down here somewhere. And it was a range. It was a range of what they were willing to receive and value. But he wanted full joy can only be had by those who can transmit the fullness of what they've received. So when Jesus came after his resurrection to a select group of people, and he taught them, and they received everything he taught without resisting it. And they valued everything he taught in the sense that it gave them tremendous joy. He said, "My joy is full." So, those older women, whatever their choices have been in life, which is highly unlikely that they made them optimally, just based on the amount of information available at the time, which dictated the exceptionality that would have to be in place for them to make those optimal choices. And just odds, so mixing all that together, chances are that whatever value they have found, they have realized it's less than what they could have found. So now the greatest joy available to them at this point, because those doors are closed, is to turn and do whatever they can to help the younger generation of ladies, the up-and-coming ladies, make decisions better than what they made them. In other words, to help anyone that will listen make decisions as if they knew what these ladies have learned through experience without having the experience. That's the trick. How would the younger ladies change their desires and actions if they knew the value of the treasures they held? I've already spoken a lot about this. They would immediately optimize their whole lives to finding the highest quality man that would marry them. That's what they would do. And everything would go in the wood chipper to make that happen if that's what it took. Career, college, friends, all that. It wouldn't matter, even family. If they understood anything about how the greatest value of the treasures they hold, if they understood anything about what that would mean to that high quality man, and how their opportunity for that decays over time and how quickly that happens, they would, as an old friend of mine from the South would say, they'd get on the stick. They'd get on with it because they'd realize that there's nothing that can compare to that in terms of value in their lives. What else would change? Well, how they did that would change drastically. And the older women would teach them this. They would tell them, look, the vast majority of men will never, ever see the value that you hold. And this is a funny thing. And this is, if you haven't already stopped watching, like almost everything I say, the value of the principles far exceeds the value of the application. In this case, the value of the application is immense, but the value of the principles still is way, way higher. Anytime you expand the value of something, it necessarily decreases the value of other things. It's not that it's a zero-sum game, like cutting up a pie. You know, if you make one piece of the pie bigger, all other pieces have to shrink, or at least some piece has to shrink. It's not like that. It's just that if I show you something that's massively more valuable than anything you've ever known, what is this like? It's like, maybe it is somewhat like the pie. Let's go with that. I apologize for being exploratory with this, but this is one reason I have the excuse to make the videos. It's going to help me make it clearer in books by talking about it. So everything you have to give can change. God can expand your ability to give. It's a lot like I call it the Grinch stole Christmas principle. See, his heart was only so big, and then it grew. This is the old school cartoon, by the way. I disavow all remakes. So, in general, his heart grew, right? And it's interesting because his heart grew after applying all of what he had. These principles they echo through. It's no joke. God, in the craziest of places, he will make himself known. It's crazy. He is so good to us. It's interesting to imagine the pitch that he gave to convince people to leave him and come here. And I promise you it didn't happen this way, okay? But can you imagine this conversation? It's actually quite meaningful and important to understand that it didn't happen this way, but I can't get into that right now. I will say that when the book of Revelation talks about casting down crowns, that's really what happens. And you should stop and think about if God popped out of the sky like a genie and gave you whatever you wanted, no limits, you just tell him what you want, you got it. And it came with the promise to have it forever. I want you to think about what kind of value would have to be presented to you in order for you to crumple all of that into a ball and throw it onto the ground gladly, like rejoicing. Because that's what happens when the crowns get cast down. And that will tell you something of the value that God actually has. And the love that he actually has for us. That when he says, there's more good that we can do for the folks that don't have it yet. These people immediately take everything that he's blessed them with and they just throw it down and say, let's do it. Let's go. And there are pros and cons to these themes being so prevalent in our media, because you're constantly exposed to things that have tremendous value. But that's not a generic description of media. I'm saying there are sprinkles of nuggets all over the place, golden nuggets of value, of ideas and themes that are put in front of you. But in movies and things, you'll see, especially in like war movies, you'll see a team of people and the leader, he says, look, you guys have faithfully followed me this whole time. We've been through some hard things. And now we need to go do this thing. And you're probably not going to make it back. And if you don't want to go, I won't think anything less of you. And I'm going to do this even if I have to do it alone. And one guy stands up and he says, I'll go with you. another guy stands up and says, me too. And the reason this gets to me is that one of the hard things to learn in life is that the number of times that really happens in life with real people, it's a lot less than it happens in the movies. Because typically what happens is the leader stands up and says, this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to do it even if I have to do it alone. And I realize that I'm probably not coming back. And then his team turns on him and betrays him. That's what happens in life. So, as you realize the value of something is increasing, what happens is the value of other things that you thought had value, it decreases. And this isn't like a slight adjustment. I've echoed what women have told me about childbirth. And I really like that example because it's such an instantaneous thing. Like, I know labor can last a long time, and women are probably scowling at me for suggesting that it's instantaneous. What I mean is in the scope of a lifetime. And what I mean is in the scope of what it enables, which is nothing less than creation, ladies. My goodness, can we please stop saying that the only worth a woman has is as a mother? First off, obviously that's not true, but my goodness. What on earth, literally, is more important than creating life at the sacrifice of your own? I mean, it wasn't that many years ago that having a baby was Russian roulette, and you could die just as likely as having the kid on a first pregnancy. It's like those statistics, those odds weren't that different. And having a baby, you're all in, you know? And it doesn't end there. It's a lifetime of commitment. For the rest of your life, you are going to be serving these kids. And I invite anyone to make an argument of any kind of equal value that could be given. And that's not because they are just women, right? That's a ridiculous argument too. If a man could have a baby, that's probably the best thing he could do too, right? I mean, good night. If this is something, I guess, you could give them, these people who are mistaken about this, a little bit of credit. Because if you haven't had kids, I could sort of see why you would believe that there's anything else that could matter at all in any comparison. But as a man, I have noticed that all of these things that I thought had value outside of the home, they do have value, but the likelihood of achieving their potential is so the net expectation of value is nothing compared to what you can do for your kids. You've got basically 18 years of a captive audience of someone who can more directly apply the things that you've paid a high price for than anyone else you're ever going to meet. As a father, that's true. And it's kind of a curse to realize this at a relatively young age, because you're still saddled with daily toil. You don't get out of work because all of a sudden you realize the tremendous value of the kids that you have. But if you're a wise young woman and one of your non-negotiable criterions is, oh my gosh, non-negotiable criteria, it's a hard word to pluralize, is that the man absolutely has to be able to support you financially should you choose to stay at home and raise kids full time. The fact that you can just walk into that. Whereas for a man to have that kind of freedom takes insanely exceptional circumstances. That's while he's still young enough that it matters. So what's the value of a 35-year-old man, let's say, who gets it? I think that alone is a very, very, very rare thing. And my brothers will agree with me for the most part that, you know, as a guy, you just don't get it for the longest time. We've got very thick skulls. But let's say you get it at 35. I mean, what are the odds that you're financially stable enough that you don't have to work anymore? Or even that you could work half time and spend all that time with your kids while they're still young and they could benefit the most from it. I'm way off topic. I'm sorry. It's like when you open the dam, all the water is going to come out. Thankfully, not all the water. There'd be a lot of people whose heads would explode. But the spillways are open. I'm trying to close them, but I'm going to say it. We have been duped and ripped off in modern culture big time. And it's not just the ladies. So historically, you know, a guy at 18 is going out and clearing land. By 22, he's got a cabin and a farm ready to go. He's got some animals, a horse or something. He's got chickens. And he's got the seed of a kingdom. And so a woman can evaluate his potential as a husband and choose to sign on for that. And she's got discriminatory information to go off of. So she signs up and comes on board and then makes everything she touches better for being there, right? And instead of a house, it's a home. And then the kids come along, and for the first while, it's mostly, well, initially it's all her, right? 9 months, it's all her. And then right after that, it's almost completely all her, because the guy can't feed those kids. Time passes by, and all of a sudden, when the kids turn a certain age, the father notices that they're there for the first time. I'm exaggerating, but this is kind of the way it goes. And then all of a sudden the kids notice the dad's there for the first time because they are all about the mom for a very long time. But the funny thing is that the time that this happens is about the same time that kid can now start making contributions on the farm. And so from a certain age, the kid starts spending more time with the dad on the farm, side by side. And the value of that has been taken from us, and nothing has been given in its place. Worse than nothing has been given in its place. We've taken dad out of the picture, and instead of dad being there teaching that kid firsthand how to work with the laws of creation, literally with your hands, we've put a cell phone in that kid's hand and replaced his dad with a bunch of equally ignorant peers. And mom's been replaced too in ways that, you know, this video is already going to be way too long. But it's a travesty. If you have wisdom and it's not too late to make a fundamental difference in your life, change in your life, you should, and especially if you're young, there is no limit to the justified prioritization you can create on these things. The ability for a father to spend more time with his children is immense. I mean, obviously a quality father, but these are things that, you know, my mother-in-law sent me a book, which cracks me up. I don't know how she thinks I have time to read stuff, but and of course, if someone gives me a gift, I feel obligated. If they believed it was worth giving, I feel obligated to take a look. This is something, you know, a strange benefit from growing up poor is you appreciate gifts. And maybe too much. So I read it. I squeezed in the time to read this book. It was Tolstoy's Death of Ivan Ilyich, or whatever that Russian name was. It was short, and she did say, like, hey, it's short. And I read it, and it's probably the first novel I've read in a long time, but in fact, I could give you a list of the novels I've read in the last decade, I'm pretty sure. Even though I somehow find a way to read maybe 40 books a year, I don't know. That sounds like a bit much, but maybe, outside of scripture. It comes in waves. But they're not novels. And I find my life much richer than any novel I've read. So it's kind of, it's like going on a vacation from the place I live in. I think it's the best place I've ever been. Why would I go somewhere else? Anyway, there's so much in all of this. I need to make fewer videos because I'm sure it's too much for people to take. Anyway, so in this book, one of the nuggets that I got out of it that hit me pretty hard, this guy's dying and he realizes on his deathbed that maybe the things that actually had value in life, because of course in his dying he's sick for a while, it's all of a sudden, he's terminally ill, and basically what he finds is that everything that he thought had value turns to ashes before him. Everything. And then he starts to get that the things that actually have value, he did not at all optimize his life for. And he comes to that realization at a time where there's nothing he can do about it. And it just fills him with immense, immense pain. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend the book, but these thoughts are very important to think about and feel through. Because the things of greatest value tend to be time limited. This life is not for messing around. And those who, through wisdom and faith, so faith is doing what makes sense to do. It's living according to the evidence that you've been given. You could also call this honesty, and there's value in doing it that way. But through faith and wisdom is the ability to rationally evaluate information. It generates knowledge. Wisdom generates knowledge. I've never heard it put that way by other people. I'm not saying it hasn't been done, but that's the independent schema I've formulated for all of that, and it makes more sense than anything I've seen about it. So the more wisdom and faith that you have, the earlier in life you will make the decisions that matter the most with the greatest optimality with respect to how things really are. That's a mouthful, but the better you play the game, the more you're going to win. And just like in chess, the longer you wait to start playing well, the harder it's going to be. Right? And there is some point, and it's different for every game, but there is a critical point where it becomes impossible to win. So at some point we were talking about how the decisions and value young women place sorry, it's going to change based on how much they value the treasures they hold, how much of the value they recognize in the things they have that have value and that they have already. You see, a young man has to acquire value. For a young woman, it's hers to lose. And a lot of people are going to be upset at that idea. But I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. So a quality man is going to be expected to grow in quality over his lifetime. And he starts at zero. The intrinsic value of a man is his weight in fertilizer. It can grow to being like God. That's the scope. On that note, how do you quantify the value of something? It's the price someone is willing to pay. What makes a high quality man is how much like God he is. That's the measure of his value. What is the value, potential value of a man or a woman? It's determined by the price paid for them. What is the price paid? What's the maximal price that has been paid for a man, for a human, mankind? It's the life of Christ. There is nothing more valuable. What is the worth of a soul? It's the value of that soul at its potential. It's the price Christ paid. It's the value of what he suffered in about 33 years of life. And what is that? It's the full scope of hell. It is enduring the full wrath of God while deserving exactly none of it. What is the worth of a high-quality woman? It is the worth of the man who chooses her. Very unpopular chain of truths there. Some of those things will go over fine, but others will not. But the intrinsic value of a woman, so I said the intrinsic value of a man is basically zero. It's actually worse than zero because by default, a man, by default, human nature is evil. And so the natural path for a man is to have negative value. Anyway, a young woman she comes onto the scene with tremendous value. Now, I'm not saying that all of that is actualized value. It's an oversimplification to say, like, if your value is the sand in an hourglass, you flip it at 18 and it'll only be less after that. That's not what I'm saying. There are things in that woman that are unactualized potential. But you have to distinguish between what can actually be seen and assessed at that time and what cannot be. You cannot know what kind of a mother a woman is going to be before she's a mother. Now, there are red flags where you can say, like, no way. But once you're above that threshold, there's nothing you can do to actually see what kind of mother she's going to be until she gets there. There are various significant reasons for this. A lot of them are hormonal. It's not like she's trying to hide anything, although some do. So, if a man values what is actually valuable in a woman, he's going to do things that are different to find them. And as I said in other videos, those paths are mostly shut down today for various reasons. But what's important about this is to understand the differences, and this is finally going to get to the second bullet in my list of notes here. Oh gosh, time is flying. The differences in value. So we're now getting back to something before I got off on all these important things. When you increase the value of something, you have to decrease the value of other things, right? And so going back to Abraham, to keep this not just on the specific example of women in marriage, as Abraham went through his life, God led him along what you could call windows of value. And he went after what he valued the most in every stage of his life. And through that, God led him to greater value. And in the end of that, he found that what had the greatest value would be someone with whom he could share all that God had given him. And he knew that wasn't going to happen with his wife. And he knew that wasn't going to happen with all the people in his household because he had already tried. He had invested his whole self until every single person in his life drew a line in the sand and said, I'm not going past this, thanks. But they drew an asymptote. There's another hand graph where they would not, they might experience a tiny bit of growth, but it went logarithmic. They weren't going to fundamentally grow anymore. So, the Spirit's telling me to dive into a question that someone asked me on the YouTube channel. I made a reference to why Abraham did what he did when those three heavenly beings came. There's dispute on who they were, and for the sake of this statement, it doesn't matter. But servants of God, will say, came to him. And why he behaved the way he did. He begged them to stay, and then he went and got a bunch of stuff to bring to them. And this person said, can you go into more of that? And I basically politely said no. So now I will. And if you're watching this, here's your reward for having waited and watched this video to this point. So the reason he did what he did, so you have to look into what he did. He went to his wife and he asked her to make the finest cakes she could. And she did. He went to, I can't remember how he got the cheese, but he got cheese. And then he went to a young man and had the young man prepare an animal and cook it. So here's the question. If you know anything about the character of Abraham, the first question is, why did he get anyone to do anything for him? Because he's the kind of guy that wouldn't ask anybody to do anything that wouldn't help them more than him. I think that the life and character of Abraham gives so much for us to learn and apply that if we had the full story, we probably wouldn't be ready for more for a while. When I have these silences, I'm actively filtering things that I should not tell you right now. It would provide relief to me, but it would be too much for you. So why did Abraham ask his wife to make these cakes? Because that is the greatest value. That was the conduit of greatest value that she had for these three men. A lot more could be said about that. In an ideal state, Abraham would have just brought his wife to these three men, and they would have talked face to face like he did with them. But she didn't have that to give, as demonstrated adequately from her other interactions with heavenly beings in the narrative. So he asked her to give the greatest demonstration of her value to them that they could receive. I'm not saying all she was a bread lady. Then he went to get this cheese. Now, cheese is an interesting thing. If you've ever made cheese, some cheese is easy to make, but I mean, I think the list is pretty short. There's a vast array of things you can do, and like all of it matters. It's the land of the meticulous. Making a consistent, high quality cheese is really hard. Even with all the magic of modern chemistry and climate control and ingredients you can buy that are consistent, it's so much harder if you ever try it with natural ingredients. So like you have to go kill a sheep and extract a certain part of its stomach. And by the way, there are about 1 million variables that are going to change the quality of the cheese. And it's not a question of better or worse only. There's bad cheese, but there's all these differences in taste and texture that absolutely depend on all of the process. So it's a really complex situation. And if you are a shepherd in primitive conditions, one of the best ways to assess the quality of your operation is if someone drops in on you, do you have high quality cheese to offer them? Because if you do, instantaneously you can say, this guy's got 300 people working for him, and this is amazing cheese. He's obviously very, very diligent at what he does. Make sense? Now milk, shepherds always have milk. That's like easy stuff. And unless the cow got into an onion patch like in Napoleon Dynamite, the milk's going to be what it is. It's like it's very easy to keep your sheep, I guess in a wild situation, not so much. But the point is it's a lower assessment of quality. What about this young man? Now, let me ask you, if you had the most important visitors you could imagine having, would you ask, and you had hundreds of people that you could choose from to go do what you ask them to do, who would you choose to do something that was critical to the success of your entertaining these guests? You would not choose some non-trustworthy, incapable person. You would choose the best young man you had. And that's very important. So he gets the best young man, and he says, prepare this animal. And I believe he chooses the animal. I don't remember. That's also important. So he hands off the process to this young man. Why? Why would he not just do it himself? So like the cheese has already been made. Maybe the animals have already been milked. Maybe he was asking his wife to make the cakes so that he'd have time to go do this other stuff. You can make that argument. But what would be more important to the end result than prepping this animal himself? Why does he ask the young man to do it? And that's the key to unlocking the rest of it. What he did in all of this was he was presenting a scorecard to these visitors to say, Lord, I love you. And then the Lord says, how much do you love me? And he says, well, look at what I've done with all the things you've given me. And you're like, man, why are you crying over cheese? He's crying over fermented milk, not just spilled milk. It's one level higher than that. You need to understand that everything in the gospel is about love. It's about laying down your life as a bridge to people. Not just your life, your heart, everything. Your mind, your strength, your desire. Laying it all down to make a way for others to perceive, to receive, and to value what God has shown you, what He has given you, and what He's done for you. And the only reason you matter is how you can facilitate that. Because giving to them what He's given to you, or making a way for them to receive it from Him, it's all about what He has to give them. And so that's why Abraham did those things. Abraham was showing those visitors that he had used everything God had given him to help all the people he could to make the greatest use of those things and improve as much as they possibly could to give and receive the greatest value. And Abraham did that because he understood how the new and everlasting covenant works, which is to do exactly that. And when you do, you get more. And Abraham wanted a child of promise, a child who could receive his promises that he had received from the Lord. A child who had the potential to receive all that Abraham had received. Because Abraham knew that the greatest joy was only available to him through flowing to another everything that he had received. That's all you want to do as a person who has received blessings from God. All you want to do is see others receive the same. But it's a mixed bag, because as God reveals to you greater value, it strips value away from the things, the placeholders. It's a term I use very often. The placeholders that have held that value to now. And I say that, and I have to make a distinction that it's always greater value he's revealing. It's not just, hey, you thought this was going to be the end all be all. Actually, it's this one, and this one's actually off the chart. It's not like that. It's like this one goes up and this one goes off the chart. It's a dividing. God is a wedge. Truth is a wedge. Value is a wedge. People with greater light and truth are a wedge. And nothing is the same after that. When Christ comes to the Mount of Olives again, the mountain will divide in two, and they will be moved very far away, and there will be a valley in its place. So, a lot more could be said about this sort of thing, but the point is value shifts dramatically as things are revealed, as experiences happen. And this is true in the microcosm of any single person's life. It's true in any period of history. It is more true in our time than it has ever been in the history of the world. And it will accelerate as time rolls on. So, an application of this to the topic at hand is that as you ascend the hierarchy of value in what you perceive and receive and value, the number of people who see, perceive, or value things the same will reduce dramatically. To draw near to God is to draw away. You don't draw away. It is to distance yourself from everyone else who's not already more like God than you. And that is a principle you cannot break. Why would anyone want to do that? Because even though, one more necessary application with that. The greater the value you place on the treasures you hold, the fewer worthy targets you will find for that treasure. Sources or sinks. If you're a young woman, the more you understand the treasure that you have, the fewer the number of men who will see that. If you're a young man, the more you understand the true value a woman has, the fewer the women you'll find who have that value. If you're a young woman, the more you understand the value of a high quality man, the fewer the men that will fit that description. And we could just do this all day, because it applies to everything. The more of the value, the true value that the gospel has, the more of that you see, the fewer the sources you will have to find it. You will be shocked as you contemplate how the majority of resources are spent in religious pursuit, because it's as far away from that value as you could possibly be. So this isn't all just gloomy stuff, though, because you'd say, like, well, shoot, I'd rather not wake up from my dream of things being a Disney fairy tale. Well, and whatever that might be, like your church perspective, your work perspective, your perspective on people, your perspective on romantic relationships, whatever it might be. Perspective on clothing. This is a 100% wool shirt. Wool is a vastly superior fabric to everything else. It's such a weird thing to campaign about. And yet, it's the same principle, right? So you're going to become an eccentric person, because value is not, it's like that fan I showed you, the folding fan. Value is not like this. It's not even like that. It's like splitting a mountain into two valleys and shoving them out and having a valley in between. There's a real extreme this way, there's a real extreme that way, and there's like nothing in the middle, right? That's what happens as you draw closer to God. He is the way. He's not the gradient. He's the way. There's only one way. And as you draw closer to him, you're exposed to consequences that are vastly different than what the world understands. And you become extreme in the world's sight. But they will become extreme in your sight. Because as you change, what you're changing into is you're seeing more of the actual picture. And all of a sudden you're flipping over tables and whipping people, right? So, but why would you want to do that? Isn't that a lonely path? You make the argument, yes, but you're approaching truth. So like you're actually approaching greater true value. Everything else is revealed as an illusion. True. Not very appealing, but true. So how can we pitch this in a way that it's appealing? Well, the numbers thin out, but what's left has such great value that nothing else compares. This is so, so important. let's take it back to our working example of the young women in marriage, because that's what we're using to illustrate these generic points. You take a typical young woman, it's 19, let's say, 20. Let's go with 20. 20-year-old woman. She's got tons of friends. She spends all of her time having fun. Sometimes she has to go to work. And school's like this mix of fun and work, but mostly fun. And so, like, work is what you have to do sometimes in order to have fun the rest of the time. That's the perspective, right? And if a random guy shows up and says, your friends are trash, you're much better than them, why don't you just spend all of your time with me? The outcry, of course, is going to be, wow, this dude's a psycho. He's this, he's that. He's recruiting for some cult or whatever. And, he's going to get treated very poorly. He for sure is not going to, what he's suggesting is not going to happen, okay, with this lady. She's not going to make that choice. Fast forward 6 to 8 years. This woman is going to find that her rock solid peer group of friends, one by one, these ladies are getting married, they're having kids, or just they're living life. And sooner or later, something comes up. Someone has to move for a job or whatever. And in aggregate, her friends are going to be gone. And lo and behold, even with the connectivity of modern technology, her relationships are going to erode. The ones that continue are going to erode into extremely superficial, let's go to the bar when I'm in town kind of relationships. And other than that, these people don't know what's going on from day to day. These people don't care. And it turns out they never cared, right? It turns out they were always superficial relationships. It was just with the convenience of life as it was easy to believe that maybe there were more, to fool yourself into believing that. And what happens is over the lifetime of a woman, the number of relationships she has goes way down. And the quality of the relationships she has, if she chooses wisely, goes way up. The highest connectivity she has will be with her husband and her children. And as the children move out of the house, it becomes her husband. Once again, hopefully. Hopefully it was that close in the beginning. And that's how it is for the rest of her life. So, knowing that that's the end, why wouldn't you optimize for that? Because the years of these exciting fake friendships, it's like 4 to 8 years maybe. So how does that apply to everything else? Well, there are people who waste their whole lives on a career, and then they get to old age and they realize, like this guy, Ivan, that maybe they could have worked a little less and still made it. There are people who prioritize things other than work only to find out that they don't have enough money to prioritize the things that actually have value, like kids, family, or, some kind of other purpose, right? You get people with stars in their eyes and they think they're going to change the world in their career. Well, you could definitely have an impact, right? But the fact is that it's extremely difficult to get a situation where the difference you make in work, even if you're highly inclined to that and you're intentionally pursuing it, is very unlikely that you're going to get anywhere near the contribution you can make in your family. There's just really no connection there and comparison there. And even then, the things that you can do outside of work, like the meaning that I have in writing these books, cannot be compared to anything I've done at work, even though I've put my whole soul into my careers. And I know that I have been told by people that things that I've done in those veins have changed their lives. And I know objectively I've solved many problems that no human being has ever solved. And I have pieces of paper to prove it, right? Degrees, peer-reviewed papers. But I also just know it factually. And I don't wake up in the morning thinking, man, I'm so glad I solved this impossible problem. I wake up in the morning thinking, here's exactly where I left off in the mystery of godliness. Let's get back at it and start chipping away some more. So, why not just optimize to the greatest benefit you can imagine and then adjust from there instead of trying to have a holding pattern and placeholders, because you pull yourself out of the path to what you're actually wanting deep down inside by doing that. You know, back to the dating type scenario, like, don't date someone that you know you don't want to marry. It's a job interview. Dating is an interview. It's not having fun. It is fun, but it is an interview. And you're not evaluating someone on how good of a dater they are. You're evaluating them on how good of a husband or a dad or grandfather or a wife or a mother they're going to be. There's another quote from an apocryphal, I think it's Sirach. Actually, it's just right here, I'll show you. I typeset this book. It's titled Wisdom, but it's not a book. So my name's not even on this, but if you go to my Amazon page, Robert Smith, and you can search for Through Faith or The Glory of God is Intelligence, and you'll get it there from one of my other books. But I prefer reading scriptures on paper, and I find a tremendous amount of value in the books of Sirach and the Wisdom of Solomon. And those are apocryphal books. Those two happen to have been, they're still in the Catholic Bible. So they were in the original King James Bible. But for some reason, Protestants decided to take it out. And I don't know the full story of why that happened or what, but I do know that there's tremendous value in those books, for me at least. And so I typeset this just so that I could have a paper copy of Sirach and Wisdom of Solomon. Sometimes Sirach is called Ecclesiasticus, but I just went with Sirach because there is a book called Ecclesiastes, and then people get confused and think it's a typo when you cite it. So I went ahead and put Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job in here, so I just had all those in one. And this is, I put this into my rotation to go through on a regular basis at a higher interval than, say, Kings and Chronicles or whatever else from Scripture, because it's just so valuable. It's amazing the truth that is in those books. Anyway, there's a verse in, I believe it's Sirach, that says, now I can't remember where I was. Oh, shoot. Oh, yeah. The wisdom of a man can only be measured in the life of his grandkids or something like that, implying that that true wisdom takes so much time to bear fruit because it's deep. These ideas are much easier for me to think about because of my background in machine learning. But long story short, when you're when you're building a neural network, the power of that AI is going to be based on how many layers deep the system for deciding things is. So basically, the more complicated it is, the larger the set of correct decisions it can make, and the higher the value of those decisions. That tends to be the case. It's not automatic. So valuable models are deep, but not most deep models are not valuable. That's so anyway, this gap has been so I can filter out really terrible dad jokes. So wisdom, the deeper your wisdom, the longer it's going to take for an outsider to get the value of it. Maybe it's true for a sense of humor. That's debatable. But wisdom for sure, okay? My wife's like, people don't get your jokes. And I'm like, that makes them even funnier. So I can never tell jokes when she has friends over because they don't get the jokes. They just think I'm a weirdo. So it takes, it takes maybe generations to see the full value of wisdom. And it's just funny to see as a parent where you make different choices when your kids are babies, toddlers, etc. And then you see the outcomes of those differences over time with peer groups where these kids are older now. And so wisdom manifests over time and experience. And it's very close to the many thoughts that I have about gardening. But a tree grows, you can't control what branches are going to sprout, but you can decide what to do with the branches that sprout. And you have to prune some and you have to train some. Like train with a tree means that you put up a stake or something and you tie the stick to it. And then it will grow that way. And as the branch gets bigger, it becomes less pliable, and then it will be that way. And then if you let them grow all wild, they're absolutely going to turn out in a way that you don't like. And in some cases, I have one apple variety. I think most modern apples, this has been bred out of them. But I have one apple variety that if you just let it go, it will grow so many branches and grow so much fruit on those branches before they're strong enough to bear the fruit that it'll be full of apples that are way too tiny to be useful. And it will also break the branches off because they're so heavy. So my go-to in farming is find the things that have great value with low maintenance. Set them up in a way that maximizes the net value. And so when I'm experimenting with things, if they are really intensive and just need a lot of care, I move on because I don't have time for that. And I'll pull it out or I won't grow it again the next season. And these trees, I have 2 of them in an orchard of maybe 50 trees. I only keep them because they're the only 2 special needs trees I have. And I just have to prune them very heavily each year. And I know that when they set fruit, I have to go and shake those really hard to thin out the apples. They all go to the chickens. And then we get really nice apples on there. And they do taste good. But if I had an orchard full of those, it just wouldn't work. So kids are like this, but all decisions are like this, where you have to figure out how much pruning and guidance stuff needs, and you don't just let it go. You have to encourage what works the best and trim back what isn't going to work. And you have to be cognizant of what's going to be terminal with the situation, whether it's a person or a situation, a thing, a job, whatever. Okay, we're through 2 bullet points of like 8. But I don't think the rest are going to take tons of time. We might have already covered it. So the next one is about, so we talked about this thinning as you go up in terms of value. It's the same in terms of light, truth, people, goodness, everything that's from God thins as you ascend, but the value of it goes up by a lot as you ascend. The kingdom thins quickly as you approach God. So in Ezekiel 28, I think, might be 38. Do I have it up? I don't. It talks about Satan, and it talks about his premortal access to the throne of God before he fell. And it stipulates his proximity to God was an extraordinarily rare thing. That even the fiery stones, which stones are a metaphor for servants, children of God, that are high up in the kingdom. They're so high that they're part of the foundation of his kingdom. Christ is the cornerstone. There are other stones that are the foundation. You get all kinds of deep with this, talking about altars. Let's just leave it. But the fiery stones are, so Satan was called a cherub in this. And there were others who were the fiery ones, who were subordinate to Satan before he fell. And even those were considered very close to God, but he had access above and beyond that. And so he fell from a very high height. So the kingdom thins is the point, where you have concourses of angels that, as you draw closer to God, you go in and up and in his presence, and the glory of the people increases, but the number who have it decreases substantially. It's exponential. And so this is really important to understand for so many things. I'm going to go into a lot of detail on this at some later point, but it unlocks so much that has extreme importance in your life. But it thins is the point. So you go through the concourses and you get to the 144,000. You get to the 24 elders. You get to the what I call the 7 governing angels. And then you get to the Son and the Father. But even among the 7, there's distinctions. There's the 4, there's the 2, and so forth. I'll explain all this later, but it thins as you go. And when you get to the top, it's 1, 1, 1. So, if you are after the greatest value, you are definitely after a minority situation. Value is always connected to people. So you're either angling to be a very unique person, and or you better wrap your head around finding very unique people. That's how that goes. As you protect and develop what is valuable, you will find that fewer and fewer people see it or appreciate it. And you should absolutely still do it. That's the facts. This flies in the face of common understanding. Assumption is really what it is, because it's ignorant. They don't know any better. The common assumption is the more valuable something is, the more apparent its value will be. That's almost always false. And the more people will like it. That's definitely false. The more holy a person is, for instance, the more they will be hated by the world. And I think most Christians would agree with that, because it's pretty obvious and plainly stated in the New Testament. Jesus says that almost exactly. And he says the world hates me, and the more like me you are, the more the world will hate you, just like it hates me. So he makes it very clear what the gradient is here. But I think most Christians weasel out of that because they're not hated. And they say, yeah, but I won't be hated amongst other Christians. And because I spend all my time with churchy people, I'm good. Nope. Let me present an interesting idea that you may not have ever considered. Do you realize that 100% of the corruption of Christianity has come from within the church? Everything corrupt about Christianity has come from people who said they were Christians. So you think about that. I promise you that if Jesus were to come today, which he's not going to as a man, so don't believe that if someone claims it, but if he came as a man, same way, he was born, lived his life, the Christian churches would be right there with the nails in the cross, just as quickly as in his day. What Jesus is all about is as different than what people who profess him believe he's all about as it could be. It's as different as could be. And if you want a reason for why Christian churches today do none of the things that Jesus promised all of his followers would do, it's because what they believe about him is way different than how he actually is. And I say this not from my opinion. If you were to meet him and somehow be able to endure that, and there's a process for that, it would absolutely shock you to see how different he is than what people say. People who've never met him and don't claim to know him. And this is why it's so important for there to be people who actually do know him. Because without a preacher, how can you know a person you don't know yet? You need a bridge to that. And this is part of the value thing. Not too long ago, we made friends with another couple. And my wife was kind of leading the charge on that. Long story short, went over to help the guy who's wounded, and I went to help him with killing some chickens. And I'm out there killing chickens, and my wife's inside talking with the wife, and I guess she asked my wife, why don't you guys go to church? And I don't even know what my wife said to that, but I think she told me, I don't remember, because I think my mind was already spinning on, well, what would you say if she asked you that, Rob? And I think I'd say that's a long story, right? But my short answer is, if what I'm after is getting a fuller or better understanding of Jesus, why would I go to a place where I'm being taught that by people who know him less than me? Conversely, so in a meritocracy, if I were to show up at a church building, they would cancel their services, give me the podium, and say, speak on whatever you want, or can we ask you questions for this whole time? If what they wanted and why they wanted it was oriented with what they were actually doing, that's what they would do. And you'd say, well, maybe they don't believe that what you say is true, like what you've experienced and what you know is true. Okay. So how long would it take to adequately test that so that you're operating on evidence instead of your guess? Right? So that's a good reason. That's a reason enough not to go. And conversely, flipping it around, if there is anyone I meet who I think knows anything about Jesus that I don't know, or who knows something I do know better than I do, there's more detail, there's more breadth, depth, whatever, I will immediately do whatever I can to extract everything they know. And it's not that time consuming because you run to the end very quickly with people. And I've done that my whole life. Not my whole life, my whole Christian life. Since I was introduced to the Lord at 18, that's what I've done. So that's what we all should do. If that's what we're all about, we should be looking for the greatest value, and we should go for it and get as much of it as we can. And you ascend higher through what you already know. You live according to the best you see, and then you're taken higher. This is the pattern again and again. True and faithful to all you know, you get further light and truth. Had an interesting conversation recently with a guy who's talking about waiting on the Lord. And he's like, well, I just need to wait on the Lord. I know he watches this video. I love you, man. These videos, I love you. Don't take this as a criticism. We've already taught. I'm just taking stuff that I've experienced. I'm helping other people. So don't feel bad about it. But he said, I'm waiting on the Lord because I want a greater relationship with him. And Spirit told me what to say. I said what I said. But basically I was plumbing. I said, well, what are you waiting for? And he said, well, it is the Lord. And I said, well, there's no value in waiting in and of itself. Everything's cause and effect. If you don't have the effect, find out what the cause is and go get it. And this is a deep thing that we could run on about, right? But the idea is that it's cause and effect. If you don't have the effect, find what you're missing in the cause and go get it. Ask God what you're not doing that you could do, or what you're doing that you shouldn't do. And realize that so many things are incremental where you got to go step by step, and this includes value. So greater value comes through lesser value. But you have to actually orient yourself to the best thing you know so he can show you what's better. And part of that is going to be suffering, so that when you get what's better, you value it. The gospel is not just about getting what has greater value that you don't have yet. It's also about seeing the true value in what you already have. And I think that's actually the greater of the two, as far as the net difference in the joy that you get. See, God, we hold all these mutually exclusive positions about God, and it's ridiculous. One of the ridiculous positions people tend to hold is that God can do anything, but we have to just accept what he chooses not to do. One of these two things is not true, right? They're mutually exclusive. So if he has a reason for not doing what he's doing, then he can't do everything. Or I like to say it in a better way, which is he can do everything but not in all ways. So find out what the path is to that outcome, and then you follow it, because he knows the way. If there's a way, he knows it. Go to him and he'll show it to you, and then you follow that. So, in this case, of this conversation with this guy, there are things that can be done right now to advance towards where you want to go. And I don't know if I told him this on the text, so this might be where I tell you. In your case, it's this idea of valuing what you don't yet have. And it gets back to this idea I've spoken about of palliative care, where you ask God for bread, and he gives you a stone, and you think you got ripped off, and you're like, but I don't want a rock, I want a slice of bread. And what he's trying to do is say, the rock is better. Trust me, take it, and in time you'll see. And I have been given so many rocks in my life, and for one reason or another, I've taken them. And I can't help but turn back and fall on my knees and thank God for loving me enough to give me what I should have wanted, but I was too ignorant to know that. And I struggle to ask God for things for various reasons today. But one of the reasons I struggle to ask him for things is because if I don't already have it, I think long and hard about. My question is, knowing God loves me so much, can I find a reason to believe that it would help me to have what I don't have more than what I have now? And it gives me great pause. So a lot of times when we ask for things, what we're asking for is way less than what he has to give. And he says, I'm going to do everything I can in the righteous laws that I subscribe to, the bounds of everything I can do without violating my character. I'm going to do anything I can to help you see, receive, and value the greater thing that you should be asking for. And I'm only actually going to give you that bread when there's nothing more that I can do to convince you that you should be asking for a rock instead. You have to let go of the things of lesser value to even get on the path, usually, to the things of greater value. You have to let go of the bread to receive the rock. And in the previous case, you don't have the bread yet, but a lot of times you have the bread, and if you can't find real bread, you find like the plastic fake bread that little kids use in their play kitchens, or anything else that you can pretend is bread, a little stale cracker, whatever. And getting back to the original example, one notorious demographic of doing this is young women. They get scared. They start to see this idea of an ideal man. There isn't a such thing, but you know what I mean. They think about a high value man, and they're like, oh, that's going to be hard to find. Tell you what, instead of accepting the idea that that's basically impossible and then doing what would be required to get an almost impossible outcome, I'm just going to do what everybody else does and have a cloud of, instead of a cloud of witnesses, they have a cloud of potential boyfriends, none of whom match anything close to what they're looking for, and they know it. And I'll just sort of rotate through them until I wake up one day and I've aged enough that my standards have dropped enough that I'll accept one of them, probably the one that makes the most money, to be my husband. And then I'll be miserable for the rest of my life and probably divorce him, 80% chance. Right? That is not the path of happiness. You have to say, no, I'm in it for the rock. That's funny because like a diamond. Anyway. I'm in it for the rock. I'm not even in it for the bread. And I sure as heck am not going to take moldy bread. And applying this generally, we've been told very explicitly what we should be looking for in life. A fullness of joy. A value that makes every bad thing you know can happen in this world worthwhile. A peace that nothing that anyone else can do can defect. That's what we're looking for. And if the path we're on that we're making ourselves think leads to that requires anything less than everything we have to give, it's really clear you're not on the path that you think you are. So find the real one, and if you can't find the real one, which anyone watching this video knows where the real one is, the gateway is to repent of all your sins, and it's in my book, Repentance. That's where you start. But if you can't find the path to what you really seek, you have to stay in a pattern where you're not filling that with garbage. You've got to stay open, searching for the real thing. Because in so many cases, a placeholder will not do. A placeholder is going to absolutely prevent the real thing. And this specific example of spouse selection is a wonderful example, because a woman cannot have a holding pattern of staying with a guy she knows doesn't meet her standards and expect that there is any possible way for the right guy to find her and to go out with her on a date. It can't happen. Because if you're dating someone else, a quality man is absolutely not going to approach you and ask you out. And the way that, that these ladies delude themselves into thinking that they could get a guy into their orbiters, their cloud of potential boyfriends, and then jump ship so that they never have to deal with being single for even a minute, and they never ever have to deal with rejection, they never ever have to deal with being alone. It doesn't work that way. It's never worked out that way. You have to be alone to make a way for the real thing. And again, generalizing this, it's like this with so many things in life. Don't keep doing what you know doesn't work. Don't do what you know doesn't provide what you want. You either have to change what you want or what you're doing. Just go read Through Faith if you haven't. That's it. We're through the bullets. This video is long enough. We've traveled the world. Hopefully it was helpful. Bye-bye.